Okay, welcome to all of you. I think we're just going to get started now. It's 6:15. I think we actually put 6 p.m. onto the posters, but I assume everybody interpreted that as like 4:15. So it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you, those who join us online and those who are here in person today to tonight's joint lecture on renewable energies, renewed authoritarianisms, ? We will begin with a presentation by Natalie Koch on After Oil, Energy Transition and Gulf Geopolitics, followed by a presentation by Hamza Hamouchene on Toward a Just Transition in North Africa, Dismantling Energy Colonialism. I'm extremely happy that both Natalie and Hamza are with us here today, as both are very well-known experts in the field of energy politics in West Asia and North Africa, or Middle East, whatever term you prefer. Natalie was recently promoted to full professor of geography at Syracuse University in New York and is currently a visiting fellow at the Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam. In August, she will start a new job as human geography professor at the University of Heidelberg, which is, of course, great news for us because it'll make future collaboration much easier. And in her research, she focuses on authoritarian power, geopolitics, resource governance, and sports geography, with a regional focus both on the Arabian Peninsula and Central Asia as well. Among her numerous publications, I just want to briefly highlight a forthcoming book with Verso, which is entitled Arid Empire, The Entangled Fates of Arizona and Arabia. And I think you said it's forthcoming in autumn? Yep. Hamza is a London-based researcher and activist with the Transnational Institute. He is program coordinator of the TNI's North Africa unit and also a founding member of Environmental Justice North Africa, a not-for-profit organization that campaigns basically around issues of environmental and climate justice as well as energy democracy in the region. I would like to particularly highlight in this regard his 2016 study, which I really enjoyed reading, The Struggle for Energy Democracy in the Maghreb. And also I want to make some advertisement for an extremely rich collection of essays on the Arab uprisings, A Decade of Struggles, to which Hamza also contributed and which you can also find on the TNI website. My own name is Benjamin Schützer. I'm a fellow with the Young Academy for Sustainability Research at the Freiburg Institute for Advanced Studies. And also a senior researcher at the ABI, the Arnold Bergstrasse Institute, and together with my colleagues, Alke Jens down here, Rosa Lehmann and Thilo Wirtz, who are with the ABI, with Heidelberg University, and also with the Young Academy, we've basically organized tonight's event, which is also part of a workshop on transnational dimensions of energy transitions, both today and tomorrow. So both this event and this workshop have been enabled by the support of the IASS. Briefly, a few words on the title of tonight's lecture. I have to admit that I basically recycled for this the title of a 6 years project that I was recently awarded by the German Research Foundation. First, I did so out of rather egoistic motivation because I very much look forward to continuing the collaboration with Hamza and Natalie also in the future. But primarily, of course, it also, I think, just fits perfectly topically. So the question is, to what extent do renewable energies renew or reshape existing authoritarian practices in the region? The photo that we used on the poster illustrates basically it depicts Sahrawi refugees who protest against the involvement of Siemens in the construction of renewable energy plants in Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara. So many Sahrawis see Siemens and other companies that are involved in these projects as contributing to an oppressive and deeply authoritarian occupation regime. While numerous countries in the region then pursue very ambitious targets for the expansion of renewables, the extent to which these efforts actually renew authoritarian practices and deepen existing socioeconomic injustices remains understudied. And this is basically where Natalie and Hamza, I think, come in perfectly. So we will first now here listen to Natalie for a presentation of about 20 minutes, and then Hamza, followed by an open discussion. Briefly, some formal remarks. We will record this event. We will later on cut out the questions, so they will not be available later on. But the event itself will be recorded and made available online. I think that's it. Welcome to all of you, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentations. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. In presence and virtually. And thank you to Benjamin for the wonderful introduction, and to the other organizers, Alka and Tilo and Rosa as well, for all of their work in putting this event together. So today I will be mostly talking to you about one of the places that is behind me on the screen. This is a view from the Expo event in Dubai, which Expo was running from October until just earlier this spring. All right, so the place behind me, as I mentioned, is from Expo in Dubai. And I have been looking at this particular story of sustainability in the Gulf for a while. I don't know how many of you are really considering these sorts of things. If you've seen this in the news, some of these sort of spectacular announcements about places like Saudi Arabia trying to promote sustainability initiatives, whether through spectacular things like the big Saudi Green Initiative and a series of events attached to that, other sorts of announcements coming from the Saudi government, big plans to install large solar arrays. You may have seen this also in Qatar, where there are certainly plans to be greening the World Cup. If anybody is watching that, you can go read all about their sustainability credentials. There are other ways that this has sort of worked into Qatar's development through the fourth pillar of environmental development in its national vision. There are also many more examples in the United Arab Emirates, and that's the place that I will focus on for today's presentation, where you have this idea of going green again, and this is working through various kinds of projects like Masdar City, which I will talk about as well. Although, of course, going green can mean planting lots of palm trees and then watering them with desalinated seawater. But that is a story for another day. One of the big parts of this whole sort of agenda and effort to promote some of these sustainability stories in the Gulf is attached to this sort of imagination of the Gulf region as being defined almost exclusively in and around oil, right? Many foreigners just sort of have this mental map of the region. And so much of this, this effort to promote post-oil futures is also to promote a new identity for the region and a new sort of vision of modernity that does not reduce the region to just oil. So this is something, as I said, I've been working on this for many years, doing these sort of event ethnographies, going to a series of events, whether that's through Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, Atlantic Council's Energy Forum, and various other events attached to this, also including Expo, where the idea of promoting the sustainable story is integrated in these event spaces, but it's also built into the landscape in many of the sites that I'm considering. So just to sort of explain how that works then, just to take the example of the sustainability pavilion at Expo as a starting place. So as you can see, it has this whole sort of spectacular image of these big solar arrays that are being promoted here. When you go into the pavilion, you sort of walk through at the top layers of the space as you move through it, this story of climate catastrophe and doom and gloom, and it's all very scary and sad, and yeah, it's dramatic. But this whole sort of narrative of we are facing this sort of crisis, it then sort of lands you at the end in this laboratory of future values. And in this space, where you have lots of bright neon colors and beautiful ideas about the future and about sustainability and being modern, all sort of fused with Emirati values and this whole story of sustainability as a space to shift that story from one of catastrophe and an evil, oil-laden world to this new sparkling bright future. This is very much the sort of future story that the organizers of this pavilion and the organizers of Expo and many of the other sort of planners within the Emirati government, different elements of the Emirati government, are interested in promoting. So this particular space, like this site, some people will have visited it, right? But it doesn't just stay at the built site itself. It also sort of circulates through the media, and it circulates in various other venues where images of the Terra Pavilion, the Sustainability Pavilion, then get picked up and moved around to tell the story of how Expo is being green and how by then association the UAE is being green. And it's going to be this future of sustainable living. This is a way that these sort of these sites and these events then sort of ripple out across the semiotic landscape. So this idea, though, of having some of these sites it's not particularly new in the Gulf, and it's actually something that has really defined a lot of the urban development there over the past decade, even though, Expo just happened this past year. This is something I've talked about in some of my other research, and what I think one of my interview respondents so wonderfully put it, that at the end of the day, they're still just building glass refrigerators in the desert, even when they get the LEED certification, even when it is called green. So this idea is absolutely fundamental to the justification for promoting much of this urban development within the Gulf. So I don't really have the time to talk about that today, but that's something I've written about a lot, and I'm very interested and happy to take questions on. But then this always sort of comes back to this question that people have about, well, what is going on here? Why are they just telling these stories about things being green? What's the point? The idea, I think, is something that many people talk about as greenwashing. I think it's more complicated than that term implies. But these green narratives, they sell things. They sell lots of things. They sell products. I'm sure many of you have probably seen, anything from food to clothes to, your electronics getting labeled as green, right? All of these sorts of things are, these greening stories sell products. They also send political agendas, ideological agendas, identities. I am a good modern person because I am being and living sustainably. And this is all because we have this larger idea, which I would argue, and I'd be very interested if anybody disagrees, to talk about this more, but this sort of hegemonic idea today that being green is to be modern. And to be modern requires that you are green and you are eco-friendly, that you have an environmental consciousness. And so I think that this idea of these greening narratives are very much about promoting that particular identity narrative of being modern. And this is particularly important. And this is also why I don't like the term or the concept of greenwashing, specifically because it's orientalizing. It's a way of saying those people over there, they don't have a sufficient environmental consciousness. They're just labeling things as being green. Whereas, yes, they are doing that, but at the same time, this is also a very Western tradition. And so there's a sort of geopolitics to this use of spectacle in sustainability projects. And there's also, as I said, a very Western, longer history of doing this. So I just want to kind of mention a few of these examples just to explain what I mean by this. Just on Monday, I went and visited the Futurium, which is a site in Berlin, a museum, where you sort of get to see this spectacle of sustainability up close. If you haven't been, go. It's right next to the Berlin main station. And at this particular site, you really get that story of Germany's vision for a sustainable future. You can climb to the top, and you can go walk around these beautiful solar panels and sort of see Germany's commitment to sustainability put on display there. That's one site. You could also visit at Expo the Germany Pavilion, which was all about sustainability. This was very much sort of selling that idea of a democratic choice. You always had to move between any space. You had to vote yes or no. Are you going to vote for the sustainable green future? Are you going to go back and stay with the fossil era? It was an exercise in sort of performing that environmental citizenship, and that environmental ethic was structured into the Germany Pavilion at Expo, all built around sustainability. But coming back to then a much earlier example of Expo and this idea of spectacle coming from the West and promoting this particular story, you had the U.S. Pavilion at the Montreal Expo in 1967, which was built or designed by Buckminster Fuller, and his sort of spaceship Earth concept was a really important sort of turning point in this idea of techno-modernist solutions or techno-optimist solutions to what was understood in the 60s as the sort of environmental catastrophe, environmental crisis. There were, lest we forget, very strong stories about environmental catastrophe in the 1960s. And so Bucky Fuller's Spaceship Earth and his later work, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, which was really a pivotal text in promoting this idea of techno-modernism, that we can just engineer our way out of environmental crisis. This was incredibly important and incredibly influential. And so the site, the Expo site was the first place that he sort of developed this. Then it gets picked up. It moves in lots of different ways and through different circuits, through architectural sites, including also a place which is just outside of my hometown of Tucson, Arizona. Biosphere 2, where this was also inspired by Bucky Fuller's geodesic domes and this whole idea, again, of techno-optimism. We can just engineer our way out of the limitations, the natural resource limitations of planet Earth. This is articulated by Space Biospheres, the sort of tract of the people behind the Biosphere project, where they were basically saying, we just need to create this sort of human experiment where we'll be able to model this living in enclosed conditions, and we'll be able to then go sort of leap out of the bounds of Earth and have these future sort of colonies in outer space. I could talk for hours about this, so I'll move on, but I'm happy to come back to Biosphere if people are interested. But this idea of the sort of techno-optimist vision starts to circulate in many ways. And incidentally, Biosphere is part of that sort of inspirational cycle that leads to Masdar City, which I'll come back to. But first, before coming back to Masdar, just going back to the idea here of having this sort of laboratory for future sustainable living. This is also what you really saw with the Terra Pavilion at Expo, of building this sort of fantasy of this limitless future of infinite provision in the desert as being the iconic place to entertain and imagine that. So that idea is being promoted in various spaces, and again, to kind of come back to the Western version of that, you see this with what I'm sort of calling the great rebranding of these energy companies today, including Chevron, Total, BP, whatever it is. Go to any of these big oil and gas companies, and you will see that they are absolutely taking all of that language about sustainability and they're pulling it into their operations. So in all of these sort of event ethnographies that I've been going to, some of the Atlantic Council's events in particular have really, they're targeted to the oil and gas industry. And I would say over the last 5 to 6 years, I've really seen a dramatic shift in those conversations amongst the oil and gas industry folks, where they really are starting to see that they need to take up this branding. Whereas before, I would say, back in 2017 or so, there were people who were very opposed to doing this. I would say that's not the case anymore. They all recognize that there's a need to do that. The same goes for then some of the oil and gas companies and actors in the Gulf, where this started really, I would say, with some of the multinationals. It is now starting to come into the Gulf national oil companies that are picking up this environment and sustainability story, and in fact sort of retroactively applying that right here at ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, saying they've been doing that since they began in 1971, because, why wouldn't an oil company do that then? Right, so it's all sort of moving towards some of the questions that I'm interested in as a political geographer, that these questions aren't necessarily something that we can judge in the abstract. And I think it's really not I personally don't find it worthwhile to ask this question of, are they quote unquote really green? There's all sorts of layers to that question, but rather to ask the political geographer's questions, which are who gets what, when, where, how, and why from using these narratives. Who's profiting and how? And why? What is the spatial impact of that? What are the spatial implications of that? There's a million ways you could answer this, right? And this is also what I love about political geography. So some of these actors, just some of the scratch the surface of some of these actors in the UAE context are behind me with all of these companies. Some of the sovereign wealth funds in the UAE, IRENA is involved, Shell, McKinsey, Siemens, which Benjamin mentioned as well. There's a mix of Western companies and transnational corporations, as well as working together with state and state-controlled organizations. I wanted to sort of spend a few minutes talking about Masdar, which is, as it says on the bottom of this, a Mubadala company, and I'll come back to that. But Mubadala is a sovereign wealth fund within the UAE. So Masdar is best known for its Masdar City project. I'm sure many of you have heard of this, a sort of eco-city that they were planning to be as sort of zero emissions, the super eco-friendly pilot project, which, as I said, it has a sort of, there is a connection to Bucky Fuller and the architectural origins of that, which link us back to that techno-optimism. But you can see the techno-optimism right there in your face when you visit Masdar. And of course, one of the only real anchor companies that is there based at that campus is Siemens. So there are Western companies that are also involved in this. Massachusetts Institute of Technology was involved in implementing it. But by and large, most people have sort of dismissed the Masdar project as a kind of failure that it really is a kind of a ghost city. I was back in January, and I've been visiting for many years now. I can't say that it's changed dramatically. But Masdar itself, I think because of that criticism, that it's going to be the first green ghost city, that they've responded to that in a particular way. And they've done that as a company, and Mubadala has done that by shifting the model and to invest in renewables and sort of other kinds of projects internationally, and really trying to build up Masdar as a clean energy company that is this much bigger than just the Masdar City campus, and to find that international reach has been expanding quite dramatically in the last years. So I think that map is not fantastic, but it gives you a sense of some of the reach of it. You look at their website, they are invested in renewable energy projects all over the world, truly all over, and in places you wouldn't necessarily expect. There's a geopolitics to this, right? There is something to be said for where these deals are happening and why. So whether that's Iraq or Israel, there are a huge number of projects that have much more to say to them, which I don't have time for again today, but that are underpinned by political relations that are happening in and through these channels of renewable energy. And of course, when Joe Biden was elected president, the Masdar folks sort of quickly pulled out this picture of his visit to Masdar back in 2016 when he was given a tour by the Gulf leader ADNOC CEO Sultan Al Jaber, and who is also the chair of Masdar and also the UAE's climate envoy. So these sorts of stories about renewable energy are convenient, and they come together in these nice photo ops, and they do a kind of political work more than just the photo ops that is not necessarily visible to us. But just beyond that, right, just beyond that investment then, I think there is another really notable change in what has happened with Masdar and what is going to happen with this that is maybe a harbinger for the future transitions that we're going to see with the oil companies and the sort of energy landscape into the future. So just this fall, they made this big announcement in the UAE that Masdar was going to be transitioning to become this new clean energy powerhouse. And they were basically putting a lot more money into this by engineering this big new deal. And coming out of this deal, basically, was a reconfiguration of the ownership structure of Masdar, which is like this is a renewable energy center for all those sorts of activities within the UAE. So this new structure includes then ownership of two different elements of the Masdar sort of portfolio. On the one end, you have renewables, which is now going to be owned 43% by TAQA, which is the Abu Dhabi energy company. They work in oil and gas and pipelines and all the sort of oil and gas infrastructure, as well as desalination. And ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, is now going to have a big share of that as well, whereas Mubadala, remember, sovereign wealth fund, oil money also, it will just retain a 33%. Then Masdar's hydrogen portfolio will then be controlled by ADNOC and Mubadala and TAQA. So this is the clean energy powerhouse, is bringing together all of these sort of oil actors and the sovereign wealth funds who are controlling that oil money to build up the new portfolio of this renewable energy effort. This is really important. I realize I'm short on time, so I'm going to try to be quick on this, but I think this is really important for places like Germany that are thinking about how to navigate this new sort of energy landscape and to call this a post-oil future in developing and promoting hydrogen, right? Because when Minister Habeck went to the UAE, he signed these deals with the Emiratis based on hydrogen production, blue hydrogen production, I will note, which only gets noted as a footnote, but that's what the Emiratis are producing as a part of this deal. This is a bigger project of the German government and other actors within Germany to promote hydrogen production, to promote hydrogen diplomacy. And this is sort of a nascent project. I think it will be very interesting to see what happens with this. But I think this sort of leaves us with this bigger question of what does that then mean for this title that I've given us of After Oil? How much of this is really after oil? Who's asking that question? Right? Because if you're ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, or you're TAQA or Mubadala or Masdar, this is a bigger question about after the oil business. Maybe they're sort of, I would say, they're sort of strategically hedging and trying to think about how to retain their corporate structure and to retain their structures of power in those particular societies. So I think that this geopolitical question needs a lot of attention and careful thought in Germany, especially as these deals are being negotiated in and around hydrogen that are being dominated by actors like ADNOC and in Saudi Arabia, Aramco. So here, I think the sort of question is after oil, is that really a question of just making our natural gas more sustainable, which is essentially what the blue hydrogen story is trying to do, is trying to spin natural gas as being green in the future. I think it's a very open question. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I'm directly going to hand over to Hamza. Thanks a lot for a fascinating presentation. Questions we will have right at the end then. I hope this works. Okay. There you go.
Perfect.
No.
Does that work then?
Perfect. Great.
Yeah. Is that okay? Let me do a timer. I have a tendency to talk a lot, so Benjamin, please remind me. Hi everyone, to those who are here and to those who are joining us online. Thank you for Benjamin and the Frias Institute for this invitation. I'm glad to be sharing the panel with Natalie as well. There are a lot of similarities between what you said, and I mean, I'm not an expert on the Gulf, but I need to learn what's happening in there. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about energy colonialism. But before I get into this, I'd like to touch briefly on the ecological and climate crisis in the North African context. So the climate crisis is already a reality in North Africa, and it is undermining the socioeconomic and ecological basis of life in the region. We have repeated, extended droughts, intensive heat waves that are impacting small-scale farmers and agriculture in the region. We have wildfires, the intensification of wildfires. We've seen in my home country, Algeria, in August 2021, deadly wildfires that caused 90 fatalities and thousands of hectares burnt. And the IPCC is predicting even more of these extreme weather conditions. The desertification. So the desert is growing and eating the land around it and exacerbating the water crisis in the region. All of the countries in the region are under the level of absolute water poverty that is defined at around 500 cubic meters per individual per year. We have also sea level rises that are even threatening the existence of islands like Qarqna and Jerba. We have the sea intrusion into fertile lands in the delta in Egypt. And of course, this is not happening just in North Africa. It is happening everywhere, but with more severe consequences in the global south. And this is taking place in parallel to an ecological crisis, to the environmental destruction, the prevalence of disease, the exhaustion of land and natural resources that are caused by an extractivist model of development. Extractivism, I don't have time to go into it. Extractivism refers to those activities which remove large quantities of natural resources that are not processed or processed to a limited degree, especially for export. Extractivism is not just about oil and gas and minerals. It can be also in agriculture, in forestry, in fishing, and tourism with its intensive water use. And basically, the extractivist model of development, which has been shaped in the colonial period in North Africa, has been in practice a mechanism of colonial and neo-colonial plunder and dependency on metropolitan centers. Throughout my field trips to sites of extractions, including energy sites in the Maghreb, mainly Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, I've seen what David Harvey describes as accumulation by dispossession and what Samir Amin describes the development of underdevelopment. I think it is straightforward to say that the underdevelopment in those regions and the poverty that we are seeing there can be related to the wealth of resources that happen to be under their feet. And this is the paradox of extractivism. It creates sacrifice zones with sacrificial people and sacrificed bodies in order to maintain the accumulation of capital. And when I say sacrifice zones, I really mean it. Like Ain Saleh in Algeria, one of the richest gas towns in the African continent, is a sacrifice zone. It has very poor infrastructure. The only hospital that they've got, they call it the hospital of death. And there are so many examples from the region. Gabes in Tunisia, you have Safi in Morocco, and so forth. So in that context of destruction and violence and death, I think a transition to a more sustainable system has become inevitable, but justice is not guaranteed in that transition process. So let's come to the renewable energy sector. The desert, the Sahara, is usually described as an empty land, sparsely populated, constituting an El Dorado for renewable energies, providing an opportunity to give or to offer Europe cheap energy resources so it can continue its extravagant consumerist lifestyle and intensive energy consumption. But this is a deceptive narrative because it overlooks questions of ownership, sovereignty, and masks relations of domination and hegemony that maintains the exploitation and plunder of resources and the commodification of natural resources and the privatization of the commons. And there are so many examples from the North African region where what I call green colonialism and green grabbing is being reproduced. So just briefly, what do I mean by green colonialism? For me, green colonialism is the extension of the colonial relations of exploitation, the plunder of resources, as well as the dehumanization of the other, to what we call the green era or the renewable energy period, of course with the associated socioeconomic and environmental impacts that are displaced to vulnerable people, to peripheral people. And when we think about the global energy transition, which is uneven, by the way, it is mostly happening in the global north, it is predicated on the extraction of rare earth metals like lithium and cobalt that will be needed from other areas. Where would these resources come from? They would be coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Chile, from Bolivia, where an intensification of extraction of resources and exploitation of labor would take place. So basically we are having, for me, the same system, but with a different energy source. So from fossil fuels towards renewables, while the same models, or let's say energy-intensive models of production and consumption are maintained, and where the same imperial hierarchies of dominations and appropriations are being taken forward. Green grabbing is another useful concept. Basically, what it means is having the same dynamics of land grabs for supposedly green agenda. And there are various examples that we can talk about, from conservation projects that dispossess indigenous communities of their land, from using communal land, the confiscation of communal land to produce agrofuels or biofuels, and also to the dispossession of agropastoralist communities to build mega solar and wind projects. So let's go into specific examples, and I think Karen talked about two examples that I'm going to say a little bit about, which is the Warzazat solar plant, which has been launched in 2016 at the time of the climate talks, COP22. And it is a big project that has been built on the land of some agropastoralist communities, 3,000 hectares to be precise, without their approval and consent. So this is a green grab. The project is a public-private partnership, what they call, which is a euphemism basically for privatization of profits and socialization of loss. It contracted $9 billion of debts from various institutions, including the World Bank, the African Development Bank, with Moroccan guarantees. Which means if the project loses money, it's some Moroccan people who would be paying the bill. So for a country that is already overburned with debt, that does not make sense. And I think it's worth saying that since the project started in 2016, it has been losing money. So it has been in deficit, I think it's 80 million euros a year. And of course, this is coming from the public purse, from the subsidies. On top of that, it's using a technology called the CSP, concentrated solar power or concentrated thermal power, which needs a lot of water to cool down the system and clean the panels. So in an area, semi-arid area like Ouarzazate, diverting the water from agriculture and from drinking towards this, I don't know, it's outrageous, to say the least. The middle solar plant, and I think Karen also mentioned this, it is being built. There are big delays in building it right now. But it is stage 2 of the Moroccan solar plan. And it is being put forward as the biggest solar plant in the world that would combine CSP and photovoltaics. Masdar is one of the people running this. With EDF Energies and another consortium of Moroccan companies. And it's already contracted debts as well, and it is being built on more than 4,000 hectares of communal and forestry land. And the tribe of Sidi Ayyad, the agro-pastoralist tribe of Sidi Ayyad, describe this as an occupation. They are not benefiting from it. They say, we're not benefiting from it. We're not working there. We're not seeing that development. And on top of that, they are taking our land and criminalizing our activities. And of course, we cannot forget about Western Sahara. So if we can describe the other projects, the Ouarzazate and Middle, as green grabbing, the projects that are being built on the occupied zone of Western Sahara can be directly dubbed as green colonialism because they are happening in spite of Western Sahrawis and on their occupied land. And I heard from a German friend, but I'm not sure because the article is in German. I need to check that, the translation, that Germany is going to change its position towards the question of Western Sahara after all the diplomatic rift and tensions with Morocco. So it seems like Germany would recognize Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara. So what do you expect from a green government? Support for an oppressed people. Basically, who cares? Let's go to Tunisia. Right now, there is a big push in Tunisia to privatize and liberalize the energy sector, to allow for foreign investors to produce energy locally and for export. There is even a law that allows for the use of agricultural land to build solar projects. For a severely food-dependent country like Tunisia, and that has been shown during the pandemic and during the war in Ukraine, because Tunisia imports most of its wheat from Ukraine, we start wondering transition for whom. And there are other projects as well. So I've been following the Tunur project, which is a venture between Italian, Tunisian, British investors who at some point 5 years ago were saying, we're going to produce energy, we're going to construct a bigger project than the Ouarzazate to export directly. They didn't even say locally. Now, like they are changing the narrative a bit because they received a lot of pressure. So it seems like we are seeing, in all these projects, we are seeing the same practices of extraction, enclosure, and grabbing. For me, I see it as a familiar colonial or neo-colonial scheme where we see the flow of cheap natural resources, including renewables, from the global south to the global north, while Europe or the EU builds fences and walls, not allowing people to come to its shores. Let's come to my home country, Algeria. So, while some Western governments portray themselves as pro-environment and pushing for regulations and targets around reducing their carbon emissions and banning fracking on their own territories, they go and offer diplomatic support to their multinationals to frack in other countries. And that's what happened in Algeria, which is a former French colony, pushing Total to do that in Algeria. So if that's not energy colonialism or environmental racism, I don't know what it is. So why I'm putting this slide, energy transition or energy expansion? Because if you look at the numbers, the amount of investments or projects of renewable energy in the global energy mix is very, very minimal. In fact, we are seeing an expansion of projects, of fossil fuel projects, pipelines being built, and of course on top of some renewable projects. So some analysts and experts are saying we're not seeing an energy transition, but an energy expansion. And actually that's exactly what happened during the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine exacerbated that tendency. So the EU right now and European governments are going everywhere to try to end their reliance on Russian gas. And Italy signed a deal just a few weeks ago with Algeria. So the Italian Eni company and the national Algerian company Sonatrach signed a deal to start pumping an additional 9 billion cubic meters starting from next year. So EU energy security primes above everything else. We are seeing more gas lock-in, more extractivism, more path dependency, and a halt of the green transitions in those countries where the EU and other countries are trying to get their energy security. Let me touch a little bit on the hydrogen hype, because I've been following these dynamics from last year, and actually I came to this through Desertec. But let's just say this clearly. This is another cover for the fossil fuel industry to continue its operations. And Natalie mentioned blue hydrogen. Maybe you don't know. Let me explain. So green hydrogen, you produce it. So you have a water molecule, which has H2O. You power a chemical process called electrolysis with renewable energies. So you break that molecule and you produce hydrogen. So because this process has been powered by renewable energy, it is green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen means you produce hydrogen from gas. And supposedly you capture the emissions with an inefficient technology so far, so it's not 100% efficient. And gray hydrogen, you just produce it from gas and you don't capture. For me, I'm seeing it's going to be gray hydrogen, even blue. I don't think it's going to work. And Germany is at the forefront of this, is everywhere. All the African continents, they are exploring it country by country to find opportunities for those countries to produce green hydrogen, not necessarily for their own economies and their own consumption, but the driver is export to the EU, export to Germany. So, and the EU has a strategy around this. Within the European Green Deal, it aims to produce 40 gigawatt of domestic renewable hydrogen in the EU, and the other 40 gigawatt will be coming from outside. And because North Africa has close proximity to Europe and has infrastructure and has also a wealth of sun and wind, they are seeing it as a primary target. But there are others on the list. There is Namibia, there is South Africa, there is DRC, there are countries even in West Africa. They are considering Senegal and even landlocked countries like Niger. I don't know where they're going to get the water, because most of the countries they are targeting are either on the sea or on the ocean, so you can use the desalination. And actually, green hydrogen is going to play a big role in the Repower EU, which is the European Commission's plan to end dependence on Russian gas. So they are aiming for hydrogen or green hydrogen to replace gas into this. So on top of trying to diversify, because it's not just about green hydrogen, it's still about gas. Even in the next few decades, it's going to be gas. So they're going to diversify their sources from Putin towards more authoritarian, to other authoritarian regimes like Algeria, Azerbaijan, Egypt, and the settler colonial apartheid state of Israel. They quadrupled their hydrogen targets. And this is just like in a few months' time. So from 5 million tons production by 2030, which is less than 8 years' time, to 20 million tons. And most of that would be coming from North Africa. There are a lot of companies out there like trying to grab the opportunities, signing contracts, memorandum of understanding, and of course the domestically authoritarian elites in those countries are happy for the money to come and do those projects. So, and all of this will be shifting because those renewable energies that you should use to decarbonize your own economy, to increase renewables in your energy mix, you're gonna shift it towards producing green hydrogen, which is an inefficient process. You lose energy throughout the line for export. So, yeah. And there are the questions of intellectual property regimes. So who owns the property, who owns the technology, who uses it, how it is implemented, and for what agenda. All these questions are very important. And I put a quote from the Repower EU, which has been published like a few weeks ago, saying, to maintain and regain technological and industrial leadership in areas such as solar and hydrogen, and to support the workforce, the Commission proposes to establish an EU solar industry alliance and a large-scale skills partnership. The Commission will also intensify work on the supply of critical raw materials and prepare a legislative proposal. I think if you read within the lines, you see that there will be competition with China here around the control of technology, the critical raw materials, and so forth. And of course, the intellectual property regime has shown its murderous and lethal character during the pandemic. And that shouldn't be maintained, but it is being maintained through free trade agreements with the countries that the EU is dealing with. I think I'm at 23 minutes, so I'll go just quickly through this. I'm not going to talk about alternatives because I thought I'm going to share with you. Maybe we can have that discussion in the discussion. But Desertec was a project in the early 2000s. The plan was to build huge mega projects of solar and wind and transport the electricity through undersea cable to Europe. That project failed for various reasons, including its extremely high cost at the time, and of course critiques about its neo-colonial character. It's jumping now on the bandwagon of hydrogen, and it's even proposing to use the current fossil fuel infrastructure, the pipelines. So there are a lot of pipelines, especially linking Algeria to Europe. They are saying, yeah, we could do some blending, hydrogen with gas. And right now, technically, only maximum blending you could do is between 10 to 20%. So, yeah, the fossil fuel industry, by the way, in the lobbies here, the green hydrogen lobbies, and it's clear, you go and you look at their funders and the supporters, mostly fossil fuel industry, Total, Eni, who else, Shell. You find them all, they love it because they know this is like another opportunity for them to continue their operations. And then I think I'll end about the displacement and externalization of socio-environmental costs. We published a study with the Corporate Europe Observatory looking just at the effectiveness in terms of costs and energy efficiency. And you could read it, TNI's website. It's not efficient. It doesn't make sense in terms of costs. I don't know how Europe would really justify buying an expensive hydrogen unless they subsidize it, but I don't know where the money would come from. But then there is the other aspect of the ecological and socioeconomic impacts in those countries. I mentioned that it will delay the transition towards renewable in those countries themselves. I'm not sure about creation of jobs. Those are usually very highly skilled projects. They do not employ a lot of people, except in the construction phase. But then, let's think about it. They need water for this. So, okay, if you're on the sea, maybe say there is an abundance of water, but you need to desalinate. You need more energy, and then it's polluting also. That's one thing. But then, if you're gonna produce blue hydrogen, Desertec says we're gonna capture it and bury it in the fields, in empty fields in those countries. So, but this is not true. It's not gonna be buried there. Usually, CO2, when it is captured right now, it is being used by fossil fuel companies to inject it into oil fields to optimize them, to extract more oil. So you are providing them with more opportunities. I'll finish with this slide, just to give you an example of the big projects that are being concocted right now. Egypt, I think, is the biggest target of projects because the COP27, the climate talks, are taken this year. So Egypt is Sisi is putting himself as a big green guy right now, signing all contracts here and there. He's saying he's gonna make Egypt the big hub of green hydrogen production. But this is in Morocco. It's a $10 billion project by Total Iran company. And they are saying we're gonna acquire 170,000 hectares of land. And I didn't know how much was that, so I looked it up, and it's more than the surface of the London area. So this will have an impact on the local people, on those economies, just to tell you of some of the impacts. I think I'll stop here. Sorry.